Tucked into a bay on the Downeast Maine coast and arrived at through a labyrinth of dirt roads dwells the Maine Seaweed Company and Circle of Friends. I was invited to spend a day there, where Atlantic seaweed is hand-harvested and dried, and so, in early July, I headed towards Steuben to meet Larch Hanson, founder of the Maine Seaweed Company. When I arrived, Larch led me down to the bay and began the story of how he started to harvest seaweed.
The first time I went with an old couple that was harvesting for their kitchen for the winter, and they had on hip boots and long rubber gloves that came up to their elbows, and they had cutting knives that were attached to long handles so that they could reach into the water at the edge. And I said, this is food, huh? And they said, yes, this is food. And then they taught me a little bit about how to cook. And then Shep Earhart was starting a seaweed company, and I started selling seaweeds to him, and I got a wetsuit and I started swimming and watching the plants and noticing the seasons and that they had maturity dates and pests, just like plants in a garden. And then I started harvesting with a borrowed rowboat. When I finally got around to building a boat, I had gone to boat building school for a few months. I knew enough to get in trouble. And then I started building boats a little more seriously. And slowly I got this customer base of cooks and raw foodists, and I suppose you could call them the circle of friends, but there's more to it than that. Later on, the people who make nutraceuticals got interested in what I do, and the business grew. There's a kelp season that starts middle of May until the end of June, so it's about a 6-week harvest season for the kelps that you would see floating in a bay in quiet water. And then after that time, they start getting secondary growths and snail damage, and they bleach out from the summer sun. It's like lettuce that goes by in your garden. So the 6 weeks, it's like a hay season on the water. And I go on 4 hours sleep a night sometimes during that time, because I'm just involved in different aspects of harvesting and drying the plants. But the actual time on the water is 4 harvests a week, where the boats are coming in with 1,000 pounds in each boat, and it gets hung up like laundry, and our standard is to get it dry, bone dry, within 48 hours of harvest, and it loses 90% of its weight because it's water. So if you had been here 2 weeks ago, you would have seen all these clotheslines along here, right here at the high tide line.
Wow.
I have 3 bushels of clothespins for hanging up the laundry, So that's how it goes. At 4 in the morning, we would be suited up in the boats going out at first light. It would take an hour to get to the kelp beds. It would take 2 hours to fill a couple of boats, cutting and hauling. And then an hour coming home. So that's 8 in the morning. Have breakfast. Wait for the water to come into the cove. The boats float up to the drying line, and then we start hanging kelp. we'd hang kelp until 3 or 4 in the afternoon. And then we would start dealing with yesterday's kelp, which would be dry and needs to be packed into boxes. And that would go until 8 or 9 at night. And then the crew knocks off. And I usually have some other details in the office. And then I get a couple hours of sleep. And then I wake up midnight and I row the boats from the cove back into the bay so they're ready to go, so they're not sitting on the mud for the morning harvest again. So we call that mooring chores. And then I go back to bed for an hour or two. I'm playing with something that's Tibetan sleep yoga, so that I'm not sure which is the dream anymore.
I ask Larch how he survives on so little sleep. He looks out over the bay with a gaze that's a mix of intimate devotion and proprietariness. It's the gaze of a man whose wisdom comes from searching out the wild again and again through the pattern of seasons and tides, knowing that this rhythm will provide the healing tonics and the answers that are needed, and knowing that the rest will continue to be a wild mystery. I look out over the bay with Larch, knowing I can't see in it what he sees, yet feeling that same sense, that it's hard to distinguish which is the dream and which isn't. To consider Maine Seaweed Company merely a niche market and a business venture would be to miss the point entirely. There seems to be a solace to the work, and though during the height of harvest the schedule can be grueling, there is a grace and rhythm that surrounds the circle of friends. Larch can be called wildcrafter or farmer, but it is a deep commitment to healing that compels him to continue this work 30 years after he began.
I guess the metaphor that works for me is that the earth itself has blood, and that blood is the ocean. And we carry an ocean inside ourselves that's blood. And that a lot of people balance their blood by eating from the ocean, eating the plants that gather the minerals that can balance us. That's probably the most widely recognized benefit of seaweeds, is that it will help balance your blood. Then on top of that, I've got a personal story. What it is that when I was a child, my father was diagnosed with cancer. I was 7 years old, and by the time I was 10, he had died. And in the early years that I spent in Maine, I would always feel that his spirit was very close to me when I was on the water. We had spent time in Minnesota, where I grew up, in boats, on lakes, and I had good memories. But after about 20 years of seaweed harvesting and just staying open to his spirit, sometimes I would be saying, well, if you need to see the world through my eyes, go ahead. Or if you need to heal up something, go ahead. And it was just staying open. What finally happened was that a cancer researcher came and said, I've been reading the Japanese literature, and I know that women in Japan have low rates of breast cancer compared to American women. I think it's got something to do with seaweed in their diet. It might be the tofu, it might be the oils. I want to find out. Can I go out on the boats with you and let's select some seaweeds and test them? She wanted seaweeds that had some iodine, but low levels, because the breast cancer survivors in her group were all hypothyroid. They had low active thyroids, low activity in their thyroids. And if they got too much iodine, their thyroids would be overwhelmed. So we finally selected the annual form of Alaria, and she tested it, she used it on this group, and finally she's saying to me, I'm getting good indications from their urine samples and their blood samples that Alaria is helping their immune systems to get stronger. This is good stuff. At the same time that I was getting it from her in the scientific world, I was getting it from medical intuitives, and I was getting it from psychics. And finally it came to Candace, my friend, taking Alaria over to a circle of healers who didn't know me. And she wanted to see what they would have to say. When she put the Alaria in the center of the circle, one of the people finally said, "Does Larch have a father who died when he was a boy?" "Yep." "Of cancer?" "Yep." "Well, I feel moved to say that Larch's father's guiding the group tonight, and he'd like Larch to know that the Alaria he harvests would have helped heal his cancer." So when Candace came home and said this to me, I said, well, I guess I have to stay at the work. So this is my 30th year, and I said to my crew this year, I don't really want to be the point man and head up the crew anymore because I've got so many other aspects of life to develop. By the end of the season, I was feeling so good that I said, I do want to keep doing this work. But I don't want to do it with a transient crew anymore, people who just come for 6 weeks and are gone again. I want to live with a group and go deeper. So I expect what will happen is that people will come and they'll say, I see there's a niche here. I could be the woodworker for 8 months building Windsor chairs if you'll teach me. And I could help you with the seaweed work for a couple of months of summer and probably have a vacation away for a couple of months and grow. And I think people who want that kind of balance will start to gravitate towards me.
We head out into the bay on the boat Larch built 13 years ago. Gwen, an apprentice at the Maine Seaweed Company, lifts the anchor and we're off. The water is calm and the sky is blue, and by all definitions it's a perfect day. We arrive in a circle of rocks arranged like some kind of oceanic Stonehenge, where minutes before dozens of seals lay in the sun. With the approach of our boat, they lumber into the water, their heads surfacing often to watch us.
So over there where the seals are, that's a rock that's got 10 bushels of Alaria. And then to the left there's a set of rocks that has about 30 bushels. This is not a very low tide today, so you're not going to see a lot of it uncovered. But see the midribs in the water?
Yeah.
The yellow, that's perennial Alaria.
Okay.
And then the other broad plant there is digitata kelp. Digitata kelp has a lot of alginates. And the alginates combined with heavy metals in the body to help people detox. It can protect you from strontium-90 or cesium-137. Those are radioactive isotopes. In the kelp family, the deepest growing is digitata. And then up in the bays we have longicurus, and near shore we have saccharina. So there are 3 types of kelp. And then also in the brown family we have Alaria. But it has totally different structure. It has this yellow midrib and likes the surf. And then when summertime comes, we can harvest dulse, which is that red plant that you see on the ledge right there, right above the water. Then we harvest bladderwrack, which is used for thyroid patients to help people with underactive thyroids. That's in the rockweed zone. Fucus vesiculosus is the Latin for bladderwrack. And then we use ascophyllum, rockweed, for fertilizer and animal food. Those are the types. You want to dry with a lot of moving air and low temperatures, because at high temperatures your bacteria rates multiply. Because it's a salty plant, it doesn't grow a lot of bacteria. If you get it dry within 48 hours of harvest, it's okay. My nose tells me what's going on. Yeah, seaweeds will ferment if they're left stagnant, undried. This year my nose has told me it's been a good crop and a good drying process all the way through. If it's kelp, the first day everything's outdoors, and if it's bad weather, it's not going to dry, then I'd be at a loss. So we work with high pressure. When we know high pressure is coming, there'll be good drying weather for 3 days, and we get the kelp up. After the first day, it's about 60% dry. The second day, it goes indoors to finish in a solar room that's got wood heat backup with fans. Nothing will get bone dry in Maine's damp climate, so it has to go indoors for the second day.
Larch cuts the motor and, clad in a wetsuit, begins reaching for pieces of seaweed.
The petals at the base of the alaria plants are the sporophyll petals. So they're pretty well developed, and that means that they didn't get destroyed last winter. These are older plants that went through the winter. Now next week I'll be out here scrabbling along all these crevices picking dulse.
Okay.
Dulse grows really well in shady crevices where it doesn't get bleached out. So I'll be following all the cracks in the rocks with my hands.
Sounds like a slippery process.
Yeah, it is. Wearing a wetsuit, I don't feel like I'm at risk. My suit gets a few cuts, but I don't.
Do you go through more than one wetsuit a year?
A wetsuit lasts for about 3 years for me. And then they either get stiff or too chewed up, and I get another suit. There's a little piece of nori.
Ooh.
See how rare it is? There's not much of it. Here's Irish moss. I harvest that too. See, there was a group of people that survived Nagasaki when the A-bomb was dropped at the end of World War II. And it was the staff of a hospital, and the doctor in charge was Akazuki. And he had been treating cancer patients who were there for radiation. He had been giving them a diet that helped them to survive radiation. So he was already familiar with how to support people who were going through radiation. So when the bomb dropped, he just simply enforced his diet on the whole staff, and they all survived. He was 1 mile from the center of the blast. In a brick building, the building went down, but the people lived. So afterwards, McGill University started studying the diet to figure out what it was that worked. And one of the things that worked was the alginates in kelp will bind with heavy metals, radioactive isotopes, like strontium-90, and take it out of the digestive tract. And it actually crosses the digestive barrier and can help clean up the bones and the blood. That's why I like alginates. I always meet people in New England who know about sea moss pudding, which is Irish moss, carrageenan. It'll be the fisherman who got ulcers and healed his belly with sea moss pudding because it's soothing. But then he gets back on the boat and goes back to all the conditions that created the ulcers again. It's a cycle. This is a nice place to float. I see why the seals like to be here. Oh, here's a baby coming at us. That's about 20 feet away from us.
Now,
They're used to seeing me out here. They're not too afraid. I've had babies that have followed me. You know, we've come upon newborns where they have teeth marks in the umbilical cord.
Wow.
And once we found the afterbirth,
Wow.
so we knew it was the first tide because the crabs are going to eat the afterbirth. So we found that baby and just got a couple of pictures of it. You know, it's in my slideshow. But once I had a baby that started following me because I was talking to it, you know, and I said, "Whoa, I better get out of here."
It was imprinting on you.
Yeah.
Wow.
2,000 wet pounds is a good day.
A good day.
Sure.
And how long is this boat?
16 feet.
16 feet.
Yeah.
And
And it cost about $300 13 years ago.
to
So
build.
I've gotten my use.
Yeah.
Yeah. No mortgages. In the early years, they would watch me landing in these places, and they'd say, "I wouldn't land there if I was you." Because they didn't want to bail me out if I got in trouble. Oh, look at all the little fish coming through. Do we have a crop of herring? Little ones. Oh, and I saw a mackerel. Well, we've drifted free of the rocks. We've seen kelps, alaria, dulse, nori, bladderwrack. We did it.